The mug of coffee on the kitchen counter was still warm when Patricia Hale's youngest daughter walked through the front door. On the morning of October 14th, 1986, in the town of Crestfield, Massachusetts, population 4,200, the air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the maples along Birch Street had gone the color of embers. Crestfield was the kind of place where the hardware store owner remembered your father's name, where the elementary school secretary knew every child by their first and middle, where nobody thought twice about leaving a door unlocked. Patricia had lived in Crestfield her entire 38 years. She had gone to Crestfield Regional High, married in the white clapboard church on Elm Street, and raised 2 daughters in a blue colonial house 2 blocks from the school where she worked. She was the school librarian. She had kept the library open 3 evenings a week for families who couldn't make it during the day. That is not a story about a woman who disappeared. That is a story about a killer who chose the most trusted person on the street, and it would take 37 years, 2 retired detectives, 1 partial fingerprint, and a genealogy database that didn't exist until 2018 to finally put a name to him. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to October of 1986. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Patricia Hale was. The 1980s in Crestfield, Massachusetts, looked like the postcard version of New England. Reagan was on the television every evening. The answering machine was new enough that some people still found it unnerving. And the Hale household had one. A boxy beige device sitting on the kitchen counter next to the percolator. Veets tapes lined the living room bookshelf alongside paperback thrillers and 2 unabridged dictionaries. The town had 1 stoplight, a diner called Millard's that served coffee in ceramic mugs and still had a smoking section, and a general store where Patricia bought the girls their school supplies every August. Patricia Hale was organized in the way that people who truly love their work are organized. Every book she touched in that library came back sorted. Her lesson files were arranged by grade, then by month, then alphabetically within the month. She had a routine that her daughters could have recited from memory: up at 6, coffee on by 6:15, lunches packed by 6:45, out the door by 7:10. She drove a burgundy station wagon, kept jumper cables in the back, and had a habit of leaving small notes tucked under the windshield wipers of cars whose owners had parked across her driveway. Cheerful notes. Never an angry word. Her daughters laughed about it. Her older daughter, Renee, was 16. Her younger daughter, Molly, was 13. The 3 of them lived quietly and well in the blue colonial on Birch Street. And on the afternoon of October 13th, 1986, the night before the last morning anyone would see Patricia Hale alive, Renee had borrowed the car to drive to a friend's house, and Molly had fallen asleep in front of the television. Patricia had done the dishes alone, left the porch light on for Renee, and gone upstairs to bed at 10 o'clock. That was the last ordinary moment. That was the last morning nobody would have to mark on a calendar. At 6:22 a.m., on October 14, 1986, Molly Hale came downstairs and found a mug of coffee on the counter, still warm. The percolator had been used. The back door was not fully closed. Patricia was not in the house. Her burgundy station wagon sat in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her coat was on the hook by the door. At 6:35, Molly called Renee's friend's house. At 6:48, she called the school. By 7:10, she called the Crestfield Police Department. The responding officer, a patrolman named Gerald Wick, arrived at 7:24. He noted the unlocked back door, the half-finished coffee, the coat on the hook. He noted that Patricia Hale's reading glasses were on the kitchen table. She had worn them every waking moment since 1979. She would never leave without her glasses. By 8 a.m., 2 more officers had arrived. By 9:30, the search had extended to the tree line behind the Hale property. By noon, the volunteer fire department had sent 12 men. By evening, every street in Crestfield had a group of neighbors moving in a line with flashlights. Nothing was found. On October 16th, 2 days after she vanished, a patrol dog following a scent trail through the woods behind Crestfield Regional led investigators to a dry creek bed 3/4 of a mile from the Hale property. A button was recovered there. A single brown button, the kind used on a practical wool cardigan. Patricia Hale owned a wool cardigan. It had never been recovered. The button was photographed, catalogued, and sealed in an evidence bag. It was logged as item 14 in the Hale case file. The case file, before it went cold, would grow to 340 pages. Sergeant Donald Calloway of the Crestfield Police Department was assigned as lead investigator on October 15, 1986, the day after the missing persons report was filed. Calloway was 43 years old, a compact and careful man who had spent 19 years in law enforcement, most of it in this county. He had worked 2 homicide cases, both resolved. He told his supervisor he believed Patricia Hale had been taken by someone who knew the property, someone who understood her morning schedule. He was right. He would spend the next 4 years trying to prove it and failing. The first suspect was a man named Roy Belmont, a handyman who had done work on the Hale property earlier that summer. Belmont had fixed the back porch steps in July and painted the foundation in August. He had been in the house. He knew the layout. He had no alibi for the morning of October 14th. Calloway interviewed him 5 times between October and December of 1986. A warrant was obtained for Belmont's vehicle. The interior was tested. No biological evidence linking him to Patricia was found. Belmont's boots were seized. The treads did not match impressions taken near the back door. By January 1987, Belmont had been eliminated as a suspect. Meanwhile, Renee and Molly Hale were staying with their aunt 2 towns over. Renee had missed 5 weeks of school. Molly had stopped eating breakfast. Their aunt had moved the percolator to a cabinet where it couldn't be seen. The community organized a search that extended across 6 weekends. A local fund was established to help with the girls' expenses. The school board voted to hold Patricia's position open for the remainder of the year, a gesture of faith that no one said aloud was becoming harder to sustain. Calloway received 12 tips from neighbors, 4 from people outside the county, and 2 anonymous letters that were investigated and led nowhere. By April of 1987, Patricia Hale had not been found. No body had been recovered. No suspect had been charged. Calloway filed the case under active investigation. He believed it would be resolved within a year. He was wrong by 36 years. By 1991, 5 years had passed. The blue Colonial on Birch Street had been sold. Renee was in college in Vermont. Molly had graduated early and moved to live with a college roommate in Boston. Their aunt had kept the anniversary of October 14th on her personal calendar, but otherwise Crestfield had, in the way of small towns whose tragedies fade, moved on. The general store changed hands. A new stoplight was added at the intersection of Elm and Route 12. Millard's Diner was sold and renamed twice. The elementary school where Patricia had kept the library added a new wing in 1993. No one named the wing after her. That was not a cruelty. It was simply the passage of time. The way towns layer new things over old grief. Donald Calloway retired from the Crestfield Police Department in 1999 after 32 years of service. His retirement party was held at the VFW Hall. People brought casseroles. He gave a short speech. He did not mention Patricia Hale by name, but those who knew him saw what happened to his face when a colleague made an offhand comment about the case. He took the case file home with him, all 340 pages. He kept it in a cardboard box in his study. He told his wife it was just for reference. She had learned not to argue with it. By 2005, nearly 19 years had passed. Molly Hale, now 32, had married and moved to Portland, Maine. She had children of her own. She told her husband once, after the children were in bed, that October was the hardest month of the year for her. Every October, she felt the familiar weight settle in, a stone placed somewhere in her chest that didn't lift until November. She had never stopped believing the truth was still out there. She had never stopped thinking about her mother's glasses left on the kitchen table. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that were lost. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now, let's get back to Patricia Hale. The case had been cold for 26 years, when, in 2012, a newly formed cold case unit within the Bristol County District Attorney's Office began a systematic review of unsolved cases from the 1980s and 1990s. The unit was staffed by 2 retired detectives working part-time and a forensic analyst named Sarah Brennan, who had joined the DA as office fresh from a graduate program in forensic science. Brennan was assigned the Hale case in late 2012 as one of 17 open files to review. She requested the original evidence inventory. Item 14, the brown button, was still in storage. So was something she hadn't expected to find. On a gray Tuesday morning in February of 2013, Sarah Brennan was working through the original case file when she located a reference to a second piece of evidence that had been collected in October 1986 and logged but never sent for full analysis. The item was a partial fingerprint lifted from the exterior of the Hale back door on the morning of October 15th. In 1986, the print had been compared against known subjects, found to be too fragmentary for a definitive match, and filed. In 1986, that was the end of the road. In 2013, it was a beginning. Brennan submitted the partial to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab for modern AFIS analysis, the automated fingerprint identification system, which by 2013 contained more than 140 million prints. The original 1986 comparison had been made against fewer than 8,000. The technology had not existed to check further. She sent the request on a Wednesday afternoon. She made a note in the file. She moved to the next case. 3 weeks later, the crime lab called. The partial print had returned a candidate match. One name. One person. Not Roy Belmont. Not anyone who had ever been questioned in connection with Patricia Hale's disappearance. The name belonged to a man named Gerald Fowler, who had been fingerprinted in 1994 in connection with an unrelated misdemeanor in a neighboring county. His prints had entered the database then and had sat there for 19 years, waiting. Brennan set down her coffee. She read the name again. Then she opened the original witness interviews and began to search. Gerald Fowler's name appeared once. A single line in a neighbor canvass conducted on October 16, 1986. He had lived 3 streets over from the Hale property. He had told the interviewing officer that he had not seen anything unusual that morning. The officer had noted his response, marked him as interviewed, and moved on. Gerald Fowler had been 31 years old in October of 1986. He had worked at the time as a groundskeeper for Crestfield's Parks Department. He drove a pickup truck. He knew the neighborhood. He was still living in Crestfield. When investigators began quietly pulling the thread that Sarah Brennan had found, what they uncovered was a portrait of a man who had existed comfortably in plain sight for 3 decades. Gerald Fowler, now 68 years old, was a retired groundskeeper with a modest house on Dunmore Road, a membership at the Crestfield Seniors Recreation Center, and, according to former colleagues, a reputation for being orderly and reliable. He attended the same church Patricia Hale had attended in the 1980s. He had likely sat in the same pews. He had known of her, if not known her personally, the way everyone in a town of 4,200 knew of one another. Court documents would later confirm that investigators, working quietly over the following 6 months, built a case around 3 converging pieces of evidence. First, the partial fingerprint from the Hale back door. Second, a pair of boot treads, seized from Fowler under a 2013 warrant, that were consistent with impression casts taken near the Hale property in October 1986. Impressions that had never been matched to Roy Belmont, but had been preserved in the case file nonetheless. Third, and most critically, biological material recovered from the Dry Creek bed in 1986 alongside the brown button. Material that in 1986's technology had yielded nothing but which in 2013, subjected to modern low-template DNA analysis, returned a mixed profile containing genetic material from an unknown male. Investigators submitted a reference sample. The profile matched. Gerald Fowler was arrested on September 9, 2013, at his home on Dunmore Road at 7:15 in the morning. Officers knocked. He answered the door in a bathrobe. He said nothing when they read him his rights. His neighbors, many of whom had, as children, watched the search parties sweep through Crestfield in October of 1986, learned of the arrest by nightfall. The story spread through the town the way stories spread in small places, quickly, and with the particular weight that comes from a name that was familiar attached to something that was unthinkable. Hidden in plain sight, a former colleague was quoted as saying in a local newspaper account, "Right here, all along." Fowler was charged with murder in the first degree. In March of 2015, following a trial in Bristol County Superior Court, he was convicted. Records show he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He made no statement to the court. Patricia Hale's body was never recovered. Molly Hale was at home in Portland when Sarah Brennan called in 2013 to tell her what had been found. She had been told to expect a call, that something significant had developed, that she should perhaps sit down. She sat at her kitchen table, the one her children did their homework at, the one where she served Sunday dinners, and she listened to what Brennan told her. She said very little during the call. When she finally spoke, she said only, "She didn't just disappear. I always knew she didn't just disappear." Renee, by then living in Vermont with her own family, drove to Portland the following weekend. The sisters sat together in Molly's kitchen. And for the first time in 27 years, they did not spend October 14th the way they had spent every other October 14th since 1986. In the particular suspended grief of those whose loved ones have no grave, no confirmed ending, no place to direct the love that has nowhere to go. The resolution was not everything. Patricia's daughters had hoped for more. Always, they had hoped that somewhere, somehow, a location might be found. That hope did not fully resolve. What did resolve, what the law and the evidence and 37 years finally delivered, was the knowledge that the world had not forgotten her, and that the man who had reached into her ordinary Tuesday morning and destroyed it had been, at last, held to account. Donald Calloway died in 2009, 4 years before the arrest. He did not live to see it. But his case file, all 340 pages of it, the impressions and the photographs and the evidence logs and the interview notes, survived him. The Bristol County Cold Case Unit cited it directly in their work. The partial fingerprint that cracked the case had been photographed by a Crestfield Police Department officer in 1986. Logged correctly, preserved, and left waiting. That officer did not know what he was preserving it for. He preserved it anyway. That is what Molly Hale said mattered most to her in a later interview. Not just the verdict, the fact that someone in 1986 had done the small, careful work and that the work had lasted long enough to matter. Patricia Hale was 38 years old. She was a school librarian who kept the lights on 3 evenings a week for families who couldn't make it during the day. She drove a burgundy station wagon with jumper cables in the back. She left cheerful notes under windshield wipers and never an unkind word. She had a daughter who drives to Portland every October, and a daughter who has never stopped believing that the truth, however long it waits, always finds its way to the light. What does it mean when the technology that solves a murder didn't exist until decades after the murder occurred? How many other cases are waiting in evidence lockers right now for tools we haven't built yet? And when a killer lives in a community for 37 years, attends the same church, shops at the same store, sits in the same town, what does that ask of us about the nature of ordinary-looking people and the things they are capable of concealing? And for those who worked this case, who did their careful work in 1986 and then set it aside and trusted it to the future, is that kind of quiet faith in what comes later something we talk about enough? Justice found Patricia Hale after 37 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.